Now, to start with, CMMC started some 5 years ago. That was in 2020, the COVID year. The initial standard came out. It came out in September. And initially, it had those 5 levels. And it was so very confusing. When I read it, I felt like, okay, I'm reading NIST 800 and 27,001 somewhere in between. Since then, now the standard has evolved. There is so much more to it. It's becoming more clearer. It is still not clear, but it is becoming better. So with that, let me go forward. Some of you know me. I think most of you know me, but if some don't, my name is Sunita Verma, and I've been doing consulting since last 16 years. And even before, as an engineer, I have worked with the framework of ISOs and CMMI and CMMC, helped some over 325 companies so far, somewhere between, small and large, and help them navigate the complex network of multiple standards and multiple locations. So I've navigated all of them. That's one of my specialties. I try to make it easy. They're fun to me, and I try to make them fun, but sometimes I have dry humor. So pardon me on that. I do carry some certifications which come very handy. All right, so what we will cover today is the basic things here. Because you work with government contracting, all of you already know these terms. We'll expand on them. The FCI, what is CUI, what is the final ruling, has that come out, where we stand, requirements for tools, subcontractors, third parties, scoping and documentation, and we will also give you, as a way of our saying thank you, the level 1 document, which is a gap analysis with the answers sheet. It has the answers written within it. Okay, moving forward. FCI, as you all know these words, but I'm just going to expand a little bit more. You all handle when you're doing any government contracting work. FCI, it's the information not intended for public release that is provided by or generated for the government under a contract to develop or deliver product and service to government, but not including information provided by the government to the public. In a layman's language, this is the information about contracts between the US DoD and its contractors or subcontractors. And there is a reference here. We will all be sharing all these references in the chat box. Myaj is going to do that. Thank you, Myaj. So you can reference these links, and they are very, very, very helpful. Now, some of the examples of FCI are the CPRs, as you call them, contract performance reports, any process documentation. These can be the PWS, some of the RFPs, any documentation around them, invoices you have when you run the payrolls and stuff. So all of them come under the FCI. Then comes the word CUI. It's control unclassified information. According to the 32 CFR 2002, it says information the government creates and processes, and that an entity creates or processes for on behalf of the government that a law, regulation, and government-wide policy requires or permits an agency to handle using safeguarding or dissemination controls. In a layman's term, any data that can be controlled, that must be controlled because of the law, regulation, or executive order that has not reached the level of classified national security information. And we'll share with you the list of these CUI registry. And as I started my journey, I had known we work a lot with government contracting companies, so we knew a lot of these CUI, but that list, the category list, is very educative. I read it, and there were so many things that I personally did not know that, okay, these all come under the umbrella of CUI. So it's a very good list to look at. Some of the examples that we pulled in, which you all handle, are personally identifiable information, sensitive personally identified information, SPII, proprietary business information, PBI, unclassified control technical information, which a whole lot of you also handle, is UCTI, and sensitive but unclassified SPU. A lot of these informations you all come across in your day-to-day workings. Now, the current model, you have all seen this, and this is what it is. Remember, I said it started with 5 levels. Those 5 levels now have trimmed down to 3 levels, much more manageable. So the levels are level 1, 2, 3. Level 1 is 15 requirements. Level 2 is 110 requirements. No brainer there. And level 3 is 134 requirement. Level 3 is what we don't need to worry about right now. I'll straightforward mention that because something that's very important to know as of right now. Level 2 is what everybody is gravitating towards, and we'll talk about that as well as we start into the final ruling, because that's where the most confusion and clarity is required. But level 1, as I said, currently the level 1, which is 15 requirements, and it's a self-assessment and there are affirmations. So in SPRS, you will do that annually. You will provide your records and update to the site. Level 2 again has two subsets. There is, and I'll take you to the next slide. I think that will clarify for everyone. So according to the final ruling, let's start with the first level. The first level, as you already know, the 15 requirements. Any organization like yourselves will be called an organization seeking assessment. You have to do your self-assessment, and you, as I mentioned, you upload your ratings to the supplier system, SPRS system. Now there is no POA&M required here, so that's not a need at all. And you will just upload all your ratings, and you have to have 100% rating on a level 1. That's a mandatory requirement. Now the level 2 here has broken down into two. One is self, one is C3PO. Each has the same requirement, which is 110 NIST controls, and there is going to be some 230 additional requirements that have to be met. So NIST 800-171 is the guideline here required by the DFARS. Every year you will do a self-assessment, you will conduct that assessment, you will upload your ratings into the SPRS if you are going for a self. You are required to come up with the POA&M. The POA&M requirements have to be closed out within 180 days, and these results are valid for 3 years. After each assessment, you will do an annual update every time. But if you choose to go the C3PO route, which is going to be a requirement moving forward, then the C3PO will assess you every 3 years. It will not be every year, it will always be every 3 years, as we all know right now. And the results will be updated into the EMAS, which is the Enterprise Mission Assurance Support Services. That's where all your ratings will be uploaded. So if you are doing a self-assessment, you will upload into SPRS, and your C3PO assessment gets uploaded into EMAS. And you are allowed, again, the same narrative, POA&M is generated, and then the POA&M closeout happens in 180 days. You have to, otherwise your rating will be pulled down. Each assessment after that, you have to do a self-assessment. So even though you go with the C3PO, you will be required to do an annual self-assessment and make sure that you don't lapse from that. As I mentioned, the level 3, the Deep CAC, is again 110 NIST requirements and 24 additional requirements, which make it 134, which is 800-172. But this requirement of the 24, which the Deep CAC requires, the protocol for assessment is the same. You go through 3-year assessment. And this is conducted not by C3PO. That assessment is conducted by DIB CAC. So the prerequisite for level 3 is you need to be level 2 assessed. And then every 3 years, DIB CAC will come and assess you. And again, the results get updated into the EMAS system. And that's valid for 3 years. With all of this, again, you will create, POA&Ms are created. You are given a time to mitigate and complete all the action items, and annually you go ahead and do your assessment, which is internal. You will do annual assessments, and every level 2 affirmations will be done, and level 3 affirmations have to happen every 3 years. The results will be kept in the SPRS as well. Now I come to the final rule. So the final rule that has basically been released, it has been submitted on July 22nd, 2025, just last month, the 48 CFR 204, it has been submitted for final review, and it's tentatively going to come out in October 2025. So in order to make all these, because DoD is expecting that somewhere around 220,000 contractors will need to be certified, and level 1, they are speculating somewhere 68% of the 220,000 to be level 1 and 38 something for level 2. all of these assessments and, even making sure that you comply cannot happen in a very short window. And this being a new standard, there are so many unclear requirements, and also the C3PAOs need to have a consistent way of assessing. So there is an assessment guide, getting people qualified, like CCAs being qualified and CCAs being ready to do the audit. That also is a rigorous protocol. So, rolling something out first and not having enough C3PAOs or having similarly CCAs can be a very challenging thing. And I have personally also run into that, because when we all got trained as an RP or a CCP or a CCA, we have also learned that the training curriculum itself is not getting certified. So that also creates a lot of, confusion for everyone. So there is this phase approach government is taking in. You can find all of this information in the CIO site. So the phase 1 rollout, the initial draft was, which was ready to be sent, was in January 2nd. And 22nd, the final draft did go into, for the 48 CFR 204 did go into submission, and it is tentatively coming out in October. So from October 2025 to October 2026, that's the phase 1. In phase 1, all the solicitations will require any organization, you're talking about the 220K contractors, subcontractors, okay, in that pool, to be level 1, level 2, self-assessed. You can have POAMs open, but you have to be self-assessed. That is the 110 requirements we are talking about. And it says very clearly, it is that, okay, it becomes when 48 CFR becomes effective. Effective date is going to be in October. So you have that 1 year. Then starts your phase 2. Phase 2 starts 12 months after the phase 1. So if the phase 1 start is going to be October, so in October of 2026, the phase 2 will start, wherein the solicitations will start having the language for level 2 certifications. Any solicitation which has that language, you will be required, organizations will be required to go for a C3PAO certifications. As of now, none does, but moving forward, when the phase 2 is there, you will be required to go for that certification. And the certifications are basically, when these started earlier, I'm known from 2022, they used to be doing something called a Delta assessment, which was on the need basis, because the CMMC or the Cyber AB was just getting into formative modes. They only performed these assessments if any solicitations. Again, in 2022, there was not much clarity. So they started doing all these exercises, but then because there was no consistent way, came up with this phased approach. Still, you will be required to have this language within the certification, your solicitation, to allow you to be prioritized by the C3PAOs. So once that is done, in phase 3, which will start in the year, phase 3 is going to be from year 2027. That is when the C3POs will come for the renewal or the extension. So anytime you are running into a contract, right, you're going to go after any contract which is renewing, or there is a recompete or something, and you want to pursue that. When that contract, considering that none of you have applied to a contract right now and you've not won it, but that will be a time in 2027, right, when a contract comes for a recompete and you want to pursue it. At that point in time, you will be required to go for a CMMC C3PO assessment. So that will be the phase. But remember, whenever C3PO comes, let's say from 2026, C3PO, if they assess you in 2026, they will not come back to you till 2029. It's 3 years certificate. That's the validity of it. So the 2027 phase 3, when I'm talking about, is any solicitation that comes to a recompete and you're pursuing it, or that solicitation may have been right now you're working on, and that comes to a renewal, and there is that new language, you will be required. Some of the solicitations will start putting this language during that time, so we will have to just watch for those. And then comes the phase 4. Phase 4 is when CMMC requirements are going to appear in all DoD solicitations and contract. And it's speculated right now that from October 1st, this is going to end and every solicitation will have this language. Now, this seems more manageable by the Chief Information Officer's team and has been considered, and this has not been changed. So since last 1 year, we have been watching and observing this phased approach, and that has been still very consistent and nothing changed here. So we are all hoping that it stays the same. Now, I do take a few slides here talking about the final ruling because that's very important. What this final ruling is basically will allow, there is a final ruling for CMMC, which is the 32 CFR, that allows CMMC to be released. But the 48 CFR 204 allows CMMC acquisition rule, which will, your solicitations will have the verbiage that for certain contracts, you will require CMMC's level, whichever level it may be. Generally, that level is going to be level 2. Level 1 is need for, when you are handling any FCI. So by narrative, anytime you handle FCI, you'll be required to do level 1. Level 1, you don't go through a C3PO. You just go to a C3PO for level 2. So when CMMC requirements are applied to a solicitation, the contracting officer will not make an award, excise an option, or extend the period of performance on a contract if the offerer or the contractor does not have the passing results of the current certification assessment or the self-assessment for the required CMMC level. Now, there is no blanket statement out there which says that, you can do a self-assessment and it will be allowed for all solicitations. So there is nothing like that, but it will change from contract to contract and solicitation to solicitation. And any affirmation of a continuous compliance with the security requirements in the SPRS, which is your Supplier Performance Risk System, for all the information systems that process, store, transmit FCI or CUI during the contract performance. So during the period of contract performance. So what I would recommend, which you all do very diligently, is to keep an eye out for the existing contracts too, if they should have that language. Here are a few snippets of the final ruling, where it all comes from. I just kept it very specific because the standard, when it got released, it has progressed a long way. And I'm not going to go and read into each of these snippets. We have shared all the links so you can read it. This is the same language. Contractor will be required to maintain all the CMMC certificates. So it has to be within the policy, the 48 CFR 204, for any claims somebody makes. So anytime you run into any confusion about the standard and the needs, this is the place you would go into and read it better. And the clause contracts. So this one I like to explain a little bit more. If you are a provider of a COTS, you just have a contract, you're sole provider or sole source for something off the shelf, commercial off the shelf item. In those cases, you will be exempt from this requirement. You don't have to pursue any CMMC requirement. Now, it says that on or after October 1st, 2025, solicitations can ask, but that has still not happened. So we're still watching for that language to appear, but COTS is still excluded. That is only relevant if you are a provider of service and that's what you provide to the government. Okay, so next I come to the big questions here, because when you prepare yourself, you operate in an environment, in an enclave, in a gov tenant, right? You all have worked towards that. So you figure out, okay, what, which tool can we get? What cloud service providers are included? Do they have to be compliant, and so on and so forth, right? What is the requirement? Should you be the only one? Are they required to be certified? Does the tool you use, does it have to be certified? Very simply put, by the DoD and CyberAB, any third-party service used to provide security within the OSC, which is organization seeking certification, CMMC scope, which has to be within the scope, right? Should be a FedRAMP moderate baseline or demonstrate compliance to the CMMC 2.0 version. Right now it's 2.1 version, and that includes all the cloud and the on-prem tools. So basically, if you are using any provider, a tool, or a third party or anything, who are within the scope, they have to be either CMMC, the same level as you, and or depending, right? FedRAMP moderate baseline. They have to cover those aspects. Then comes the question about subcontractors, because you may be working, you may have teamed up with other agencies, organizations, and they help you provide these services. So the same level of requirements, the CMMC, they have also expanded the flow down of to the subcontractor levels. If the subcontractor also processes, stores, or transmits the FCI or CUI. So we'll go into a little bit of depth on this one. But before I go right there, externally provided services that is not your cloud service providers and do not process, transmit, or handle your CUI do not require CMMC assessment or certification. If your ESP is basically a staff augmentation company and they don't do anything, right? As an OSA, which is you're seeking the assessment, you provide all the processes, technology in the facilities, then your ESP really does not require to do any of the CMMC. Again, you can request them to be compliant to level 1 or level 2, but that is not a requirement per the way the requirement is coming from the DoD and CyberAB. All right, so the minimum flow down to your vendors or your subcontractors, any third party. So let's consider that if you as an organization, as a prime, you are looking for a level 1 as a self, your vendor is handling FCI, they have to be level 1 self. They are handling any CUI, this is not applicable because at level 1, you won't be handling any CUI. You yourself won't be handling anything, right? So that is not relevant. In level 2, if you are pursuing self, then your vendor has to secure level 1 self. If they are handling FCI. If they are handling CUI, because level 2, you come across CUI, then they have to do level 2 self. It flows down to them. Level 2, if you're pursuing and you have to, because of the solicitation, you have to pursue C3PAO and your vendor is only handling FCI, then they have to be compliant to level 1 requirements, not level 2. But if they are also handling, you have the same requirements, they store, process, transmit any CUI, then they have to be level 2 and get it appraised, assessed by the C3PO. Level 3, which is the DIP-CAC, if you are pursuing that and your vendor, they are handling only level FCI, then you are going to do only level 1. But if they are handling CUI as well, then again, they will not do the level 3, they will only do the level 2 C3PO assessed. Now, all of this comes from the CMMC program. Again, the information is through the CIO website. We'll share again this link so you can look at it. Some of these aspects, there is greater clarity where if you look at the Microsoft, as the tool, Microsoft has rolled out something called a placemate, right? It tells you that Microsoft has so many services. Some people use Intune, some people use Sentinel, and so on and so forth. You know, also the Azure environment. And there are several aspects to it which are compliant, which are not compliant, according to the CMMC. So there is going to be a lot more discussion on Microsoft. There is more clarity when you're talking subcontractors like that, but tool-wise, there will be a lot more clarity needed. So kind of, I would encourage you to pay more attention when you're selecting tools for your, subcontractor vendor companies and all of them. It's much more easier and simpler. So with that, I move to the level 1 requirements. The good part with level 1 is you don't per se need any documentation, meaning you define the scope, right? Scope is necessary. As part of the scope, you will say, okay, what is in scope, what systems, processes are in scope, what is out of scope, and any specialized assets that you're handling. Now, the assets in the scope for level 1, according to the 31 CFR, all the assets that store, which, you have kept them stationary, as an asset, like the accesses that are entered, edited, generated, any metadata that comes in, right? You store, meaning FCI is inactive at rest, right? It's located within your, the hard drive, the electronic media, or it can be a paper copy. It's printed and you kept it in your drawers. Or transmitted, this is from one end, one user point to another user point. So this is the data in transit by physical or digital transport methods. They all have to be protected. So all the assets have to be identified. Generally for level 1, focus is on the access control, all the 15 requirements, your device protection and data handling. So till the time you create all these procedures, protocols, as I mentioned, you don't need a procedure, but I would encourage you to create something because it becomes easier to be consistent, persistent, and you can repeat your processes if you have formal documentation. It becomes also very easy to prove the implementations if you have something in place. The end result, when you think of, okay, you have procedures and all, what is the end expectation? So end expectation of CMMC level 1 is once you define your scope, you have the documentation, you do a self-assessment, and our neat little cheat sheet, the one we are talking about that will come to you, you can utilize that. That is your self-assessment. Based on that, you can say, okay, I'm assessing myself. How am I grading? I've done all these things. I've implemented everything. Or you take the time to implement if there is a gap there, right? Once you have completed all of that, you want to have somebody validate all this and make sure that you are meeting all the objectives of level 1. Because this is self-assessment, the assessment can be done multiple ways, meaning your network configuration, you can show some training records, and they all become as the evidence. And there is variety of technique we use to examine, we interview, you test some of the controls to make sure that they are effective and consistently implemented. Now in level 1, the rating has to be 100. You can't say that, okay, I'm not meeting this requirement. Till the time it's 100, that creates a flag. So even if you are doing a self-assessment and uploading your results, you want to make sure that the result is 100 before you upload into SPRS, or it will. Level 2 is where a lot of questions will come because the scoping guideline requires you to identify a lot more. The assessment is also very rigorous. So you want to be starting. If you already have not started, I would encourage you to start now. Take little steps. There may be, varying degree to a different level. Things are being implemented within your organization. Keep the scope narrow. That's the recommendation I will always give, but be very consistent. CMMC has identified the asset category that are required. When you are defining your scope, you want to make sure that CUI assets are defined, identified, security protection assets are identified, contract risk managed assets are identified, specialized assets are identified, and out of scope are identified. So you cannot just skip any of those categories because let's say you don't have anything, you can say these assets are not there. You can also write within the exclusions, but you cannot just say we don't have and remove that because you'll be then furthermore questioning will happen. So as an organization seeking assessment, which is your organizations, that's what your entities are generally called, you are required to document each of the asset inventories that is required. Now, I would encourage you to go ahead and embed everything in your SSP because SSP will be shared with the C3POs moving forward, and you will be uploading some of these documentation. Basically discourage you to have all the lists and everything within your SSP. SSP is a mandatory document that you need with level 2. You do need a thoroughly documented scope as well as a network diagram showing the data flow. You need the policies, you need a lot of policies, you do need procedures, and to an extent you will need SOPs. But again, the requirement of SOPs, we leave it to your IT teams, and it is on need basis you want to come up with. But the more important is identification of the asset categories, identification of these inventories, making sure that there are treatments for risk-treated, treatments for all of your asset types, coming up with these policies, procedures, SOPs, and making sure that finally you start with the gap assessment, you do go through this exercise of a lot more creation of this documentation and come and do, let's say you are doing a self-assessment or taking support of an external company who can do this assessment for you. You want to achieve a score of 80%. Okay, that is a must. A minimum 88 requirement from the 110 is needed. Now this becomes really confusing here. Because if you notice something, there are 110 requirements and there are 320 control objectives. So the rating goes from, the range is 110 and negative 203. you get negative ratings. And everybody should be mindful. This is one of those tests where you get negative ratings. So you don't want to get a negative rating. So any control you don't meet, then you get like if you do not meet any requirement around access control, the requirement can have a rating of, let's say, 5. You get a -5 immediately. So when you are completing your SPRS, you want to be very thorough. You want to make sure that all the requirements, you review it and you have implemented or you do plan to implement. The good part is that you can have partial implement and have the POA&M. POA&M is our friend, plan of action and milestone is our friend, because you can have a plan of action and you have 180 days to close it. You have 6 months to close those things. Most of these, when you may be wondering, that which contracts will have the language for C3PO assessments and whatnots. Right now, the way a DoD has defined is self-assessments will be limited to those that are non-critical contracts. If they are going to be critical contracts, again, their definition and their decision points are going to be different. But all the critical contracts, which are DoD term critical, will have the language. One big aspect, when I say the subcontrol, something that I have also learned this firsthand through some of the implementations that I have done is, please, when we were implementing NIST 800 171, and there were high level 110 requirements, there was not, so let's say if I was looking at, if you look at the NIST, there is AC L23 1.12 requirement, right? When we did NIST, it was it just had access control 3.1. It didn't have the subcontrols. We didn't go into subcontrols. So it was only access control and we had some specific requirements. But now with this level, we have a whole lot of sub requirements. They are called assessment objectives that's why assessment objectives are 320. So what that means is that in order to meet the access control requirement, you will have to meet the sub requirements with 320 requirements. So what I would say is, because of these requirements, this entire achieving compliance seems like a very big project. I would highly encourage go section by sections, making sure that you have the right procedures, you have the right configurations, and grade all the controls very objectively. Make sure that if you are taking a partial, that's fine. Look into where you have more points. Some of the things, like, when we were in maybe college, that's the last I remember, right? You look at the points. If something has a 0.1, right, and it will take you $10,000 to get that 1 point, right? I won't go. I will take a risk. I'll not implement that requirement. But it has 5 points. I'll implement that requirement. So I would look at the rating first and then do a very objective gap assessment and then look into the rating and then go about securing additional tools or any help. Just don't go and secure all the latest tools or expensive services without understanding where you fall. So the first thing I would always say, look, do a gap assessment, very objective, very detailed gap assessment. Start there, and then any tools, any configurations, and even with the third parties, MSPs, you go and get a lot of things done, secure a lot of high-end cloud services. So again, look at it very objectively and then come to this decision. The second thing which I have learned is, a lot of people do this. They combine their policies in the procedure. I would say keep them in different documents, because most of the organization, they just don't have one standard. They have multiple standards. You just don't you don't have CMMC. You have 27,001. They have 9,001. They have 20,000. They have CMMI. They have a lot of these things, right? You can again leverage all the information from different standards, because procedures and policies, you don't have to necessarily just create for the enclave. You can create it organization wide, and you can get them tailored for those when the team is handling for the gov tenant. You can get them tailored and use it. But keep these documents separate, not as one manual, because if one thing changes, you are going to keep on updating the manuals. Or if you change the policy, and some people need to know only the policy and some people don't need. So keeping them separate is a wise way to go. But again, that's just a recommendation. There's no right and wrong. Standard doesn't say one way or the other. Additionally, keep a tiered documentation style, meaning keep like the manuals, the policies, then you want to come up with the procedures, then you want to come up with the forms and the SOPs. Keep a tiered structure that allows you to look at things at different periodicities. You have to review them, right? You create all these policies and you still have to review them annually, or maybe in 18 months, whatever you decide. So keeping some of them in this particular manner and coming up with that tier document allows you to define these periodicities. So generally we see is the policies, something like your acceptable use policy, access control policy, and procedures like incident management plans, your asset management processes, and they generally will require top level management approvals. But let's say you create SOPs, something I mentioned earlier, that your IT team, they create the SOPs. They are like how they do some, like when they do the system logging, how they do the logging, or they do the auditing or system access controls, how they manage it, right? It is written very specifically for their department. They don't need to be approved by management, but your policies and procedures do need to. So you want to create SOPs. Again, if you have outsourced your to an MSP, then you don't need those SOPs because they have their own SOPs to follow. But if you have not, you have internally dedicated team, then you do need it. So an example here, this is how the scope statement has to be done, because generally I also get this asked several times that, Sunita, what should be put in the scope? In addition to having a data flow and a data processing methods here, so I would encourage you to think of a statement. If some of you have taken 27001 standard, it's kind of very similar in that we have a statement of applicability document. Here we have the SSP. As I mentioned, SSP is necessary, POA&M is necessary. You do need the policy, you do need the procedures, and you do need the data flow diagrams, network diagrams. But a scope like this will go on your certificate if you get assessed by a C3PO. That's what it looks like. It identifies all the assets identified and categorized in your SSP, the version of it, and the date of it. I know this is a lot. I spoke a mile a dozen as well. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have. And if you do need any clarification or you do need some gap assessments, so you can reach out to Miad. She is your friend here. I do have a book a call link here as well. You can reach out to her. We'll send you the list so you can get that checklist as well. We are happy to take the questions. Go ahead. Any questions? I know that this standard has been requiring a lot. I see a lot of marketing going on where I wouldn't say unnecessary fear is getting created, but a lot of confusion is getting created. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll send the checklist.
Perfect. Have
Thank
a
you
great
for
day.
discussing that. Thank you, Sunita.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.